Welcome to this new automotive news video for Wednesday, May 13, 2026. And today we're going to talk about the new disastrous decision made by the French government that could finish off our French brands. We're going to talk about Jeep, which is announcing the new version of its Avenger, Volkswagen, which is delaying the arrival of its electric Golf. And finally, we'll talk about BYD, which wants to do everything to prevent you from reselling your used BYD. These are the topics for this Wednesday. I hope you'll find them interesting. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to show your support for my channel for free. You can do that by leaving a like, subscribing for upcoming videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and of course, leaving a comment where you share your thoughts on today's news. And just before we get into the topics listed for this video, I'm adding another little news update, a follow-up to a video I made a few weeks ago. Remember, we talked about MG, which had a major issue during the Euro NCAP crash test phases. Because with the MG3, it was found that in the event of a collision, the passenger seat could detach, which could obviously cause particularly serious injuries. I told you I would keep you updated if MG issued a recall for this safety issue, and now it's finally happening. Indeed, MG is recalling its MG3S, or at least certain potentially affected models, depending on their manufacturing period. So the Euro NCAP organization is inviting all MG3 owners to contact their local MG dealership to schedule their recall repair. We're going to start with some news that directly concerns our industry, the French automotive industry, or at least what's left of it. I've gathered 3 news items that just came out and are somewhat on the same topic. First, we're going to talk about the first 2 relatively quickly because they're not the main topic of today's video, but just so you know, Caroom, which is a French car broker, did a small study comparing the French vehicle surtax system to similar tax systems in European countries. Here are the main figures and key information to remember from this special report on the vehicle surtax. First of all, between 2008 and 2025, the average CO2 emissions of new cars sold in France dropped by 33%, while during the same period, the vehicle surtax was multiplied by 31, going from a maximum of 2,600 euros back then to 80,000 euros now. Another chilling figure: 7 out of 10 cars sold across manufacturers' lineups in France are subject to a surtax, either the CO2 emissions surtax or the weight-based surtax. Caroom aimed to show in this special penalty report how absurd and counterproductive the French penalty system is, as penalties vary across Europe, and the French system is generally the harshest and most punitive. There are big differences. For example, the latest BMW X5 diesel faces 80,000 euros in penalties.
Diesel de dernière génération, c'est 4.
In France, that means 80,000 euros in penalties. But in Germany, there are none. It's not about BMW being German. Their system is different. For example, consider the Peugeot 5008 plug-in hybrid. In France, indeed, there is no CO2 penalty, but with the weight penalty, there is a 6,100 euro penalty. Well, in Germany, across the border, there's no penalty at all, even though it's a French brand car. Not only is this system absurd, but it's also counterproductive. Even though, as explained a few moments ago, the average emissions of new cars sold in France have dropped a lot over the past 15 to 20 years, the average CO2 emissions of the entire French car fleet, meaning all the vehicles driving in France, have stagnated for the simple reason that the French buy far fewer new cars than before. First, because they are much more expensive than before, but also because even when you manage to find cars that aren't too expensive, there are big penalties to pay afterwards. The result is that the new car market is completely collapsing. In France, it's down 20% compared to the years before COVID, while at the same time, the used car market is booming. Since the French can no longer afford to buy new cars, they are buying more used cars. Cars that are sometimes 15 or 20 years old, that don't meet current environmental standards, and instead of being scrapped and replaced by a new model, they stay on our roads for longer. So the penalty is counterproductive for the economy, but it's also counterproductive for reducing CO2 emissions. Another item we'll cover briefly, which concerns our dear French decision makers. We learned this morning that because of the very high fuel prices since the beginning of the conflict in Iran, and because of the government's total inaction, which has done nothing to really try to curb the phenomenon, we learned that fuel consumption has dropped by about 30% in France since the beginning of May. That said, it's actually good news for the planet, why not? But it's bad news for the economy, since this drop also means a decrease in taxes collected by the state on fuel purchases. In the first 10 days of May, this is estimated to cost the state 300 million euros. And that's not even counting all the revenue lost indirectly because of higher fuel prices. We know that many French people stayed home more, did less shopping, went out less, did fewer activities. In short, they consumed less, and that also has a negative impact on the economy. The French government's new absurd decision will also negatively impact the economy. Starting in 2028, France will be the only European country, along with the Netherlands, to completely ban advertising for vehicles whose CO2 emissions exceed 123 grams of CO2 per kilometer. 123 is really not much. 123 grams. For example, a C3 or a Peugeot 208 is also around 125. In short, cars that are not sporty or particularly exceptional cannot be advertised at all. When we say completely banned from advertising, it's not just on TV or billboards, but everywhere, including the internet. That doesn't mean there won't be any more car ads. It just means that the only cars that can be shown in ads will either be electric or plug-in hybrids with very large batteries. The only way brands will be able to keep promoting their cars after 2028, their cars that emit more than 123 grams of CO2 per kilometer, will be to go through, for example, YouTubers or influencers who would be paid, for example, to do a video review of a vehicle. That doesn't make much sense for a lot of manufacturers because what car maker would want to produce and sell a car if no one hears about it? And it's a decision that, paradoxically, will mostly hurt French brands, because Chinese brands in France mainly sell plug-in hybrid cars or electric cars that have very low CO2 emissions. German brands, with the emissions penalty tax in France, have mainly focused on plug-in hybrids, which also have very low CO2 emissions, at least on paper. Japanese brands are very good with hybrids. Let me give you an example. At Toyota, only the RAV4, which is a large SUV, goes above the 123G limit, whereas for French brands, except maybe Renault, we're lagging behind in almost all technologies. Rechargeable batteries. French brands have decided not to pay too much attention to them, or at least to limit themselves to models with rather small batteries in the end. As for electric cars with range extenders, they're completely behind as well. Here, Renault will only have its first model of this kind in 2028, Raphael, and it will still cost around 60,000 euros. And when it comes to electric vehicles, most French brands are still lagging behind, except for Renault. We'll see. Maybe by then, French brands will have amazing cars. But this won't help the market. Remember, in France, the average new car buyer is 55. The age group in France that buys electric cars the most is the 55 to 65 age range. And the average age of French people who watch TV, those who are most likely to be exposed to car advertisements, is 58 years old. I think you see where I'm going with this. It's not going to help the market. As for Jeep, a brand from the Stellantis group, they're giving some new information about the facelift of the Avenger. Not much is changing, except that the center of the grille will now be illuminated, and that the entry-level version with the PureTech 1.2 engine with a timing belt has disappeared to make way for the new generation 1.2 PureTech engine with a timing chain, which is the famous engine that Stellantis plans to phase out by 2028 or 2029 to focus on more reliable Italian engines. In the end, the thing that will change the most is the price, since the entry-level version is 840 euros more expensive than when the entry-level version of the previous Avenger was launched, with a price of euros 25,590. That's still expensive for the PureTech. The plug-in hybrid version also increases slightly, 40 euros more to reach euros 27,890. We're also going to talk about BYD, which is trying to lock down the resale of its used models as much as possible, which is what BYD wants to do with its electrified models. So everything that's going to be hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or electric is to create a certification that only the dealer will be able to issue. A label that can only be obtained by cars that are less than 6 years old, have less than 150,000 kilometers, have a flawless maintenance record, and all repairs have been carried out with original parts, but also within the BYD network. More specifically for electric cars, we know that in the used car market, what often holds people back with electric cars is that it's not easy to trust the previous owners. Since battery replacements cost tens of thousands of euros, they're very expensive. And we don't know how the vehicle was treated or how worn out the battery is compared to a completely new one. With this label, BYD wants these dealerships to be the only ones allowed to sell certified cars, since other dealerships that are not part of the BYD network won't have access to this label. And obviously, individuals who want to resell their BYD on the used car market won't have access to it either. They won't have it. BYD is completely transparent about this. The goal of this maneuver is to control and secure the profitability of the used car network, which for many dealerships is much more profitable than new cars, by convincing BYD owners to resell their cars through a dealership. This way, they can better control resale values and minimize the space left for other sellers, quite simply. And finally, we'll quickly talk about Volkswagen, which is delaying the arrival of the electric Golf in its lineup, for two main reasons. First, because the current Golf, both internal combustion and hybrid versions, is still selling very well. So there's no urgency for Volkswagen to rush out a new Golf. And second, because the chassis that will serve as the base, the SSP platform, has been delayed in development. It was designed to incorporate an 800-volt architecture and next-generation batteries, which should give it improved charging and better range. And the first models based on the SSP won't arrive before 2028, so most likely, the electric Golf won't be here before 2029, or maybe even 2030.
Voire peut-être même 2030.
That's it, we've covered today's news. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, I'm counting on you to leave a like, subscribe for upcoming videos, and become a supporter by clicking the join button below this one. See you again tomorrow for the next one. Take care. Bye.